All right, here we go with the tried and true Santa Cruz Hightower. As the name says, this time it's back for the 4th version. It sees basically the same updates that we saw with the Bronson V5, except this is the dedicated 29-inch wheel platform. So do all of these updates help it stack up against the rest of the really strong competition in the category that we've seen lately? Stick around to find out. One quick item of business before we dive in. We've created kind of a new scoring metric or a rubric here where we set a neutral or an average, which is 0, and 0 is not bad. The average these days is very, very high, so 0 is great. If you can get a 0, sweet. If you're better than average, you get a +1 or a +2. If you're a little bit worse than average, -1, -2. This is relative to other bikes in the category, not XC versus an enduro bike. This is for these bikes in this category. So if you want to see the Hightower scores, stick around to the end. So what is new about the Hightower 4? Just like with the Bronson, we see that new frame design that does allow for easier access to the shock for setup and tuning. We do see an additional 5mm of rear wheel travel, bringing the Hightower up to 150 rear, 160 front. So the longest travel Hightower we've ever seen. The suspension kinematic is refined a little bit to allow for better off the top sensitivity by reducing that anti-squat just a little bit. As far as geometry goes, this one is a tiny bit slacker, a little bit longer, and it's taller too, both in the stack and the BB heights. Most of that extra length comes from the front half of the bike as a function of that slacker head tube and the longer reach, but the chainstays do grow a tiny bit, but only 2mm. We still have a C and a CC version here, with the CC being wireless only. So if you want to build one frame up, plan on a wireless build. So let's dive into the ride portion of this, and we'll start with the uphill. The Santa Cruz Hightower 4 is designed to be the jack of all trades, do-it-all bike that it's always been. Even though on paper the suspension kinematic got a little less anti-squat, I don't think it negatively affected the bike on the climbs. It's tough to take one feature or one update on paper and look at it in isolation and judge a bike off of that. It just isn't a good picture of how a bike rides. Bikes are fairly complex and can often be more than the sum of their parts, especially once you translate that from paper to the trail. All factors considered, I think the Hightower climbs pretty well. So starting with that suspension design, again, it's not the most efficient platform we've ever seen, but keep in mind that efficiency is not everything. Instead, this bike is a bit more active to provide more traction and control on those rough and technical climbs. That said, the suspension still does a plenty good job of not wasting all of your energy. It's just not quite as snappy as a couple of other bikes in the category that we've seen lately. I'd say from a suspension standpoint, the bike is happier on rough, loose, and steep climbs than it is smooth, flatter, and faster climbs. The fit is very upright and comfortable, just like the Bronson. I rarely have to lower my bars on the steer tube. I almost always run it at or very near the top. On this bike, I've had to drop it down quite a bit to get enough weight on the front wheel and to get that position where I like it. With that tall front end, it might be a little bit more difficult for some folks to weight that front end. This bike is not one that you can ride just hanging off the back of it, where you shouldn't be anyway. Or for those folks who want a really low front end, kind of that racy feel, that might be difficult for them to achieve on this bike. Uphill handling is a bit more on the casual side. It isn't super sharp and snappy, and that can make the bike wander just a little bit, especially when you get on those steep climbs. With how much traction the Hightower provides, doesn't really matter if you wander or if your handling feels a bit vague, because where you put it doesn't matter all that much. You're going to have traction, and as long as you can keep those wheels turning, you'll go where you're trying to go. Overall, I think the Hightower is a very solid climber. If it weren't for other bikes in the category being ridiculously good right now, this bike would probably be one of the best. The competition is really, really stiff right now. Now moving on to the descents, this is where this bike starts to stand out a bit more. It's easily one of the most capable bikes in the category, if not the most capable. Between the suspension feel and geometry, this bike just screams Santa Cruz. It's remarkably similar to that new Bronson, even with two big wheels. While the Bronson skews a bit more playful, the Hightower skews a bit more stable and confident. although there's really not a lot between them. So let's start off with that suspension feel. The compromises that Santa Cruz made on the anti-squat stuff really pays off on the downhill. The Hightower is very plush, it's quiet and stable, while still offering a ton of support for bigger hits, goofing off, cornering, all of the above. It handles small bumps and chatter very well without ever unnecessarily blowing through the travel or being too easy to use. It's very much the best of both worlds. It ends up being that ideal blend of plushness, stability, capability, and pop, play, and fun. I don't think any type of rider who lives for the descents will find too much to complain about when it comes to suspension performance on the new Hightower. It is unrivaled in the category. As far as geometry goes, the Hightower sits up pretty tall and confident. And for the first few rides, I had my bars too high and it felt a little bit vague and wandery. But after lowering the bars quite a bit, the handling did get sharper and more precise, although it still doesn't quite match the Sentinel or the Ripmo in terms of that really sporty handling feel. However, those two bikes can't compare to the Hightower in terms of stability. Between the suspension and the long wheelbase, the Hightower remains relatively unfazed in rough terrain, even with only 150 mils of travel. It mutes that chatter and the rough better than all of the bikes in the category. So if you like your descents rough, this is probably one of your top choices. As far as the fun factor goes, the Hightower suspension does a lot of the heavy lifting. So the handling isn't super sharp and sporty, but that suspension quality is what offers the nice balance between fun and stability. It's very easy to get the Hightower off of the ground and get yourself over obstacles. It doesn't fight changing lines very much, although it doesn't really care about what line you choose. Now let's jump into a couple of comparisons here, and I have a Sentinel Ripmo Hightower video in the works right now. We've filmed almost all of it, so I'm not going to spill the beans. I'm not going to compare to any of those, but I will compare this to the Bronson 5. I would imagine that blindfolded, most riders would be hard-pressed to know which one of these they were on. First of all, they'd be wadded up into a tree somewhere, but if they could happen to ride by braille, it would be tough to pull these two apart. They have a very similar handling characteristic and ride quality. The biggest differences I could feel out on the trail were the traction on the Hightower, that you just got a little bit more rear wheel traction on the brakes than you did on the Bronson, as well as a little bit more high-speed stability because of the two big wheels. The Bronson does feel quicker to lean over and get itself around a corner though. But again, these are very minute differences. Santa Cruz remains pretty adamant on the flip chip thing. They feel that a flip chip to accommodate for MX and 29 is too much of a compromise. You can't make each bike ride how you want it to ride, which I'm not an engineer. I don't really know all of the compromises you have to make to put a flip chip in, but most every other bike in this category now has a 29 or MX option on the same frame. I don't know if Santa Cruz would be better served having a flip chip and having a bit more versatile bike that someone can buy one and go back and forth with, or if being adamant about perfection on every frame is the better move. I don't know, I'll let you decide. So what would I change about the Hightower 4? There are two things. First of all, I'd make the CC frame cable drivetrain compatible, just for practicality and versatility. Second, I'd put some sort of stop at the bottom of the internal frame storage compartment. I can confirm that a small package of Gushers fruit snacks can find its way below the shock bolts and into the no man's land or limbo down by your bottom bracket. I can also confirm that the rattling sound that makes is very aggravating, and I can also confirm that the process of removing said Gushers looks very similar to the scene from a cartoon where a bully shakes a kid upside down for his lunch money. I can't confirm though whether your snack will find its way down there or not, but it's probably recommended to put everything in one of those supplied frame bags and then put it in the storage compartment. So who is the Hightower 4 for? With basically every bike in this category, it's easy to say this is for somebody who wants a mountain bike. It does everything, it goes everywhere. And that is true about the Hightower. It goes everywhere, does everything, it climbs, descends, does easy trails, gets after it on the hard ones. But I will say this is the most DH skewing bike in this category. So if you love descending, the Hightower is likely your best fit. It is damn tough to beat once the trail points downhill. I also think the folks who need maybe just a little bit more forgiveness or confidence out of their bike, this would be a good option for doing that. Still a well-rounded, well-balanced option, but it does have a bit more forgiving ride quality to it. So if you just want a bit more confidence or you need a little bit more out of your bike to get yourself down the rough stuff, go for it. So here are the scores for the Hightower 4. Keep in mind, 0 is neutral or average, plus, minus, you get the point. Climbing performance, this gets a -1. Not because it's bad, but because everything else in the category is so good. Descending capability, +2. It's better than almost any other bike in the category on the descents. Suspension performance, another +2. This bike is just unrivaled in terms of that suspension feel. Handling, we get a 0 here, perfectly average. It can be a bit vague, but it is stable. So pick your poison, right in the middle. Versatility, this one gets a 0. Again, it's versatile in terms of ride quality, but a couple things like no flip chip might ding it a couple of points. Again, I don't think it's bad, it's just right in the middle. And this last category, the intangibles, this is like frame, stiffness, strength, build quality, paint, all the things that are hard to quantify. This bike gets a 0. It's perfectly fine. You get things like lifetime bearings. You actually get frames that hold up very, very well. But you do have a CC frame that is wireless only, which kind of kills some practicality a little bit. And you got the problem where stuff can get down past your shock bolts and into limbo. So 0. And that's going to do it for the Hightower. Thanks for sticking around. See you next time.